How's it going, everyone? We have a guest with us today. Our guest is Nico Starlight. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Awesome. I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking. So, how long have you been practicing for?
Oh, I tell people generally somewhere around the mid 2010s. So it's hard to know exactly when it all started. Like I took up meditation for a little while, and at the time I didn't think anything was happening, but in hindsight, many years later, looking back on those times, I was like, oh boy, was it ever happening in those first couple of meditations? So I say I always had an interest in this kind of stuff, but really took up practice probably around like 2013, 2014, and have
Okay,
had
so
something
over a decade
rather,
then. Okay.
yeah, just about a decade, and have had something relatively consistent since then. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It's funny how subtle some of the processes of change can be sometimes, and we often don't even recognize them and until we look in retrospect and it's like, oh wow, I'm sort of a different person now.
Well, it's like that with students too.
Sure.
When I'll ask somebody to do something very simple like the posture of pure awareness, for example, and they'll tell me of some of their experiences with a meditation like that, and to them it doesn't seem like nothing, but to me I'm like, oh my gosh, they, they like got it perfectly.
So is that something that you instruct then?
It's I don't have any formal pupils or
Mhm.
students, and student is like a broad term, obviously.
Sure, sure,
Student,
sure.
candidate, right?
Mhm.
Any seeker of the light, I suppose, would
Sure.
fall into that.
Aspirant even, yeah.
Exactly, aspirant is a great word as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And those who are a little further along on the path, so to speak, can be of great aid and assistance to those individuals, right?
Certainly.
So students, aspirants, they're all kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I like celebrant as well.
Celebrant.
So, so what got you interested in all this to begin with?
Oh well, I mean, I was like a little psychic baby. So
Okay,
I had an interesting relationship with my imagination from a very early age, right? And
excellent.
I didn't what like when I got to my teenage years and hormones were spewing out of my eyeballs, it got really difficult to navigate in that world. And I even had some illnesses in my family, like particularly my parents, and that had a really strong effect on me as well. And it just got to the point where I didn't know how to navigate my mind anymore. I didn't know how to maintain health and vitality in regards to the psyche. And it was out of necessity really that I had to find a way to fix these problems. But magic was easy because psychology was cool, didn't really interest me, and I didn't really know what to do there, what the practical applications of psychology were outside of therapy, perhaps.
Sure.
And there weren't really other many other avenues at that time. Like medication was out. I just thought that was a silly idea, right? And so why don't I learn how to fix the psyche myself? Why don't I learn how to work with the psyche myself, right? And and like loved Harry Potter as a kid. Came to Lord of the Rings later in life, but loved Harry
Love the
Potter as a
glasses,
kid.
by the way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is I'm in Dumbledore's youthful state, right?
Yes.
As the beard gets longer and grayer, I feel that'll be my full metamorphosis. um,
Excellent.
and yeah, so I heard about temples, and I heard about uh, um, societies like the Golden Dawn
Mm.
and the societies of Rosicrucian supposedly doing this thing called magic, and even some of the more Wiccan stuff as well. I was like, oh, this is interesting. They're calling this magic, but it couldn't possibly be magic. I wonder what this is. And so I started researching that sort of thing, and then came across I think it's still on YouTube actually. Came across Israel Regardie narrating the middle pillar ritual,
Hmm.
and I listened to that after every day for a while. And then once I got the idea of what he was doing and sort of memorized what he was doing, I vibrated the names myself for the first time. I vibrated the Hebrew God names myself,
Mhm.
and then that got the ball rolling. I was like, okay,
Oh
there's
yeah.
something here.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It just lights that fire. What you're describing about being a psychic baby and the hormones and having to navigate all of that is so intimately familiar to me. That resonates with me at such a deep level.
Mm,
Um, I don't want to make this about me, obviously, too much because I want to learn about you, but I can't stress enough how familiar that sounds. I was, I guess you might say, a psychic baby as well. I would see things, I would feel things, and I would hear things. And I was told, oh, that's just your imagination. I'm like, just my imagination, And then hormones sort of
mm,
brought in all of the confusion and chaos of transformation and, the calcinatory fire of the crucible. And
mm.
that just sort of propelled me forward. So you mentioned the Golden Dawn and Rosicrucianism. That's actually not something that we've been able to discuss yet. Would you like to get a little bit more into that?
Would you?
I would love to. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well,
So, um, yeah, just go. Please go ahead.
well, so the only other thing that I wanted to mention in regard to the whole psychic baby thing, and the reason why I sort of call it that is is I was involved in a little thread on Reddit not long ago, and this idea came up in one of my responses that the most remarkable thing about the magical path is there's a lot of people who are exceptionally powerful magicians and don't even know it. And
Absolutely.
in my own case, it took a very long time for me to realize that I was doing things when I was a child that were very much magical in nature.
Hmm.
Assuming god forms, consecrating
Hmm.
talismans,
Yes.
astral traveling, all of that kind of stuff was. I can point to instances in my childhood where I was very much doing that kind of stuff, but the awareness is what I think marks an initiate or a non-initiate or an adept versus non-adept. Is it's not so much because Stephen King is a perfect example of somebody who has an exceptional magical ability, and he has no idea whatsoever that he has that power. Yet, if Stephen King came into the awareness of that power and was still able to do what he does, now we're talking. Now we're having the magical conversation. Now we're talking about somebody who would fall into the characteristics of an adept, right? And
But
so
yeah.
my whole journey through the Golden Dawn system has been pretty much that. Not
Mm.
so much a question of developing magical ability, maybe sharpening a few skills for sure,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
also becoming aware of what magic really is, and coming into that state where I'm not doing these things unconsciously, but doing these things with full awareness of what I'm doing. So it
Absolutely.
wasn't such a big deal when and my original god form was Elvis Presley. I would watch Elvis Presley on the TV, and I would wear the costume, and I would very much become that individual with. And the confidence is what's so characteristic about assuming a god form that way
Mhm.
is. And I could, it's not like I'd be going around introducing myself as Elvis Presley, but I would be in that form, and the confidence that that character would have was very much
Mhm.
something that I could embody, but I had
Mhm.
no idea that I was doing it.
Mhm.
So now 15, 20 years later, when I step into the god form of Osiris and I'm fully aware that I have that ability, it's a completely different story, right? And it's a completely different kind of magic. It's more that initiate level, adept level stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. I find it's interesting that you bring up Stephen King specifically because the last interview, if it wasn't the last one, it was two ago, someone brought up that exact example. And it's just like, yes, exactly. And all too often, like I've said this before, I'll say it again, some of the most powerful magicians don't even recognize that they're magicians or they wouldn't call it magic.
Mm,
But what you're touching on, that awareness principle, it's like it opens up the bandwidth. It's it's
mm-hmm,
it's like it gives more of a form for the force to impregnate or utilize. And
mm-hmm,
so much of this work is about raising awareness and expanding awareness, I think.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's even for me, it's always encompassed in that maxim from the Hebrew Kabbalah, Echye Asher Echye, which is I am
Yes.
that I am.
Yes.
It's the full current of the God manifestation reflecting back to itself, right? So it's
Yeah.
not so much that you have this outpouring of divine light sort of into endless space and endless manifestation, but it needs to reflect back to itself.
Mm.
And I think that is characteristic of that awareness. In the non-initiate, you just kind of had that outflow of divine light stretching into basically nothingness, endless nothingness. But when it snaps back on itself, and basically God is perceiving itself in the breadth of creation, that's where things get interesting.
You bring up something incredibly interesting in my mind, which is I'm sure you're aware of like the neophyte and the zealotor meditations, where the neophyte begins on the principle of the point, and then the zealotor begins from the point, and then the ever expanding like a ray. Mathematically, it's like a
Yeah, yeah.
ray, and that's that whole thing. It just gives me chills to think about how accurate that is.
Well, the Golden Dawn really had the bull by the balls. I can't speak for the offshoots, because it seems like every generation since the original Golden Dawn in the late 1800s has lost a little bit. And now it's a shame to say, but it doesn't seem like I was corresponding with somebody from a Golden Dawn temple in Toronto, and I was astonished
Mhm.
at how little a real magic was happening in the conversation that we were having.
Huh.
This person, it just seemed like they and I see it in university students as well. I live in a university town, so I interact with these folk quite regularly. It's really not impressive to me at all if you can memorize a whole bunch of information and regurgitate it. I'm looking for substance and originality, and I want to look at your ability to formulate your own ideas.
Yes,
Everybody's got inspirations, and everybody's more or less a product of their inspiration, but I want to see what you can create from your
absolutely.
inspiration. And regurgitating knowledge that came from your masters and their masters before them and their masters before them, it's incredibly boring. And the
Yeah.
Golden Dawn, the original Golden Dawn, had something real original. Whether it was working off Mathers's genius or Westcott's like intellectual abilities, or if there were actually masters behind it all, we'll never know. But something seems to have woken up and kind of created this made it possible for us to initiate into those higher
Sure.
levels of magic and but unfortunate to say, it seems like it's been diluted quite a bit as
Right.
the generations of the Golden Dawn go on. Like I guess Sella Matutina and then Society of the Inner Light from that, and I think
Mhm.
Crowley had some branchings as well. So yeah, but boy did they ever have it, and that's so clear in the material that Israel Regardie leaked.
Mhm.
Thank goodness he leaked it. Cheers to Regardie for being a bit of a badass. Same with Crowley, the tables from the 777, the tables of correspondences. That's Golden Dawn material for sure. And thank you, Crowley, for leaking that information. We wouldn't have it today. Um, but it's so clear, and like everything you'll hear me say is comes from my work in the elemental grades for sure.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. And you touch on another very important point in my mind, that is the that magic is all about, maybe I shouldn't say all about, a very large portion of magic is about transformation. And if you're not integrating the teachings to an intimate level where you can then transform them and turn them into something else, uh, I I question um, I question the techniques, because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, it's meant to be a transformative process. And if you're just regurgitating and memorizing information, that's intellectual. That's all
Mhm.
in Hode. Where's the Netzach?
Mhm.
Where's the passion and the inspiration?
Mhm.
Very good.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I concur. I mean, and this is true of things outside of magic as well. We see systems that are rigid and don't have the ability to evolve die
Hmm.
out. They die out. Of course they die out. If
Hmm.
uh if something doesn't have the flexibility to grow and evolve, it's going to die out. Absolutely. There needs to be some kind of mechanism that keeps with the times, more or
Well,
less. Right?
it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just mentioned Hoden Netzach and the path of the tower that connects those two spheres. That energy is breaking down in my mind, breaking down old systems that are no longer serving a purpose for evolution and transformation.
Hmm. Very
So,
cool.
what is your experience with? You mentioned Rosicrucianism as well. Is that something else that you can discuss, or?
Not really. I mean, due to the nature of it, there's really not much to say.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and the fellow Rosicrucians know that, and
Sure.
it's the funny thing. What you know, I have some friends who are working on that level, and when we get together, it's not the things that we're saying, it's the things that we're not saying, and that's kind of how we know.
Sure.
It's like the silence itself is a wink.
Well,
Just saying.
there's almost an energetic communication that happens, a very subtle spiritual conversation that happens behind the scenes that only certain people are aware of sometimes.
Yeah, that's correct. And I get it with books. You know,
Yes.
Paul Foster Case. If it's weird to say, but it very much feels like when I pick up one of his books and I read one of his books, it's we are tapping into to something together, right? And who knows what it is? I you know, the kind of beauty of that Rosicrucian thread of magic is we don't know what it is. We have no idea. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe at some higher levels you can get some kind of an inkling as to what that Yeshua current really is, and but nobody knows, right?
No. At the
Just
end of the day, yeah, I'm still trying to figure all this out. I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, and I still have no idea at the end of the day what's going on. I'm just keeping notes, and I'm keeping track of my experiences, and I'm trying to correlate them with others' experiences to try to extract some sort of meta truth across the board.
I see. Yeah,
So, have you read much of the works of like Rudolf Steiner, and like the and stuff like that? Or I personally haven't. I just, whenever I talk to people about Rosicrucianism, Rudolf Steiner is a common name that comes up.
I haven't read any Steiner.
Okay, no worries.
I came to the Rosicrucianism from the Golden Dawn thread.
Sure.
So it was all the inner order Golden Dawn members that I was interested in hearing from, which is why I
Mhm.
mentioned like Paul Foster Case, and
Sure.
even Regrady had a pretty good grasp on Rosicrucianism as well.
Okay.
And when I say Rosicrucianism, very much in the style of the inner order work of the Golden Dawn, rather than Rosicrucianism as its own thing. Because I've
Hmm.
spoken to
Hmm.
one of those individuals as well. That's just part of, I don't even know what it is.
Amorph or
AM or
something. Yeah.
yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. And it was the same. It was almost worse than the guy that I talked to from the Golden Dawn Temple in Toronto. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's
Very shallow.
nothing
Interesting.
happening here at all, right?
Interesting. Interesting.
So
So,
yeah, so I was interested mostly in Dion Fortune never made it into to the inner order, and that's clear in her writings. And Paul Foster Case 100%. Even Arthur Edward Waite, as boring as he is, was an inner order member for sure. Um, Mathers, I don't think made it into to the inner order either. It's one thing to initiate into these levels, and it's another to actually do the practical work.
yes.
You'd be amazed how many people have got their badge and their charter of Adeptus Minor from the Golden Dawn, and what does Regardi call them? The Ineptus Minor, because it's plain to see, it's plain as day. It's somebody who really is operating on those levels. It's so plain to see, even in reading their stuff that's almost 100 years old. So plain to see who's playing the game and who's not, right? And
Yeah.
Mathers wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing.
Yeah, you're touching on very interesting concepts, I think, and one of those is materialistic aspect of spirituality
Hmm.
and all of these grades and badges and all the trappings and stuff that are really just symbolic, and oftentimes people get lost in the physical facets of things, and you can really tell when someone is doing the work. Like you said, there's just an air and an energy about them that is, it's unmistakable.
Oh yeah, and I'm amazed at people like Pat Zaluski,
I'm not
who
familiar with them.
he's Golden Dawn carrying on the Ware Raw current, I think, down in New
Okay.
Zealand. I could be wrong about that. But New Zealand, another Golden Dawn temple across the world, and wrote books and sort of disclosed information on the grades beyond Adeptus Minor. So the Adeptus Major ritual and grade work, and Adeptus Exemptus rituals and grade work. And I read those, and I saw an interview with Zaluski, and I'm like, it's not here.
No
I don't
connection.
know.
Yeah.
No, it's just like, so the way I'll say my understanding of the grade of Adeptus Minor, like 5 = 6, is it's the only grade of adepthood, and there's just an infinite amount of advancement therein. So
Well said.
why do we
Mhm.
create this Adeptus Major? Why do we create this Adeptus Exemptus? It's like summer school. Oh, you didn't get it. You didn't get the point, so now you have to do extra work in hopes that you got the point. And Zaluski's been at this for 5 decades, I'll guess, and he still doesn't have it. And I'm amazed. He's the his Enochian is like out of this world, but he doesn't have that sort of inner order
Yeah.
adept air about him. Blows my mind that somebody could dedicate so much time to the Golden Dawn thread of magic and accomplish nil, accomplish
I,
nothing
I
in the
I
way
think
of it.
that comes from what is the word, negligence in the lower, like the elemental grades. Building that foundation is so crucial.
Hmm. Yeah, and I wonder if there's a correlation between those who don't attain onto the grade of Adeptus Minor and those who scoff at the elemental grade work. I assume there's a correlation there.
I assume there
Uh,
is as well.
yeah,
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, well, what is, to me, the grade of Adeptus relates to the quintessence, and how do you have the quintessence without the balance of the former elements, right?
yeah. And we're saying that there's grades beyond the grade of quintessence. That
Super
doesn't make any
spirit.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there'll always be a refining process, and that's why I said that the grade of Adeptus Minor's got an infinite amount of advancement therein. But it's
Hmm.
all the same grade. It's
Hmm.
all the same grade. There is nothing beyond it. It is literally the philosophic gold, the magnum opus. It's the it factor, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I say anybody doing work beyond the grade of Adeptus Minor missed the point.
Yeah, yeah. Perhaps that's true. That resonates with me as well. People mistake the map for the terrain, as it's often said, or they mistake the meal for the menu. They look at the tree and they're like, "Okay, I'm here," and it's like you're all over it.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
just only, you know, focusing on a certain aspect of it, oftentimes. Hmm.
yeah.
All right, so excellent. What are some of your favorite types of workings to do?
Oh, planetary. I got a really strong affiliation with planets,
Okay,
and I say it's my favorite working, but it's probably the easiest. What comes most naturally to me.
sure.
Um, the Adeptus wand that I gravitated towards is the Phoenix wand, the second
Okay.
Adeptus wand, and analyzing the symbolism of that, consecrating that implement is probably where I got the most amount of growth and development in those higher grades, and it and so we're talking about the second ring of the blooming rose upon the cross, if you've ever seen that symbol. Um,
Second ring,
it's
yes. Yeah, yes.
yeah, and it's and yeah, so I'll say that current of things is it probably comes most naturally to me. But my favorites are the things that I like fumble with. My favorites are the things that I'm like not good at. Um, I can't do zodiacal workings to save my life, yet I'm really, really, really trying to get something worked out there.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just I don't get them. Same with astrology. I was looking at the questions that you sent me, and one of them was on my weaknesses, and astrology, easy. I don't get it at all, right? Uh,
Okay.
but I like doing that kind of work because it's me stretching and me kind of carving something out in my own understanding of things. And the best way I can understand astrology and even the paths of the tree and that blooming rose is the tarot. As I relate back to the tarot, when I
Yeah.
conceptualize Aries, I look at the path of Hay and the Emperor of the tarot. Right, that's the only way I can conceptualize the zodiac is as a path on the tree of life. um, these energies coming from the constellations and natal charts and transits. Can't get my head around it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
funny because I just started working with zodiacal energies like 3 days ago.
okay,
And I'm still like, when I say working, I mean like trying to doing experiments scientifically, so to speak, and trying to figure out, okay, where is this current coming from? Where does it go to? What can I do with it? And it's the most abstract current that I've worked with. And I consider myself, well, I guess I try not to consider myself as anything. Most people would probably consider me something of a chaos magician. So I've
oh
worked
sure.
with some really out there currents. And
Mm.
for some reason that zodiacal current is just, it's so abstract. I think it's because of how subtle it is, maybe, or how unsubtle, how macrocosmic and influential it is. It's almost like it's like I can't see the forest through the trees sometimes when it comes to those energies, maybe.
Yeah, well, it does something very different
Mhm.
than say planetary energies or elemental energies. Is it
It's more, yeah, yeah.
it splits itself again,
Yes.
which I don't like because
Mhm.
there are a couple that feel a little volatile and a
Yeah.
couple that feel that um, it would be really difficult, not impossible, of course, not impossible, but difficult for somebody to control.
Sure.
And subjugation is the name of the game. And in what I do, it doesn't make sense to me to sort of give my will away to these energies, but quite the opposite, sort of bring them under the presidency of the higher will
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
let them be vehicles of manifestation, so to speak. And
Sure.
and volatile forces are tricky because they don't want to stay in one spot. They want to jump all over the place. And I like what you said in them being abstract because part of the game of subjugation is conceptualizing these things
Sure.
and giving them a very definite name and understanding, name and image, right?
Hmm.
And I can't make sense of certain currents. The ones there's a few. I'll say about half of them I can conceptualize as
Hmm.
just an extension of the ray, like the red ray, the orange ray, the yellow ray, the green ray, so on and so forth. But those ones in between, like the reddish orange ray and the yellowish orange ray, those are those little where it splits itself again.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that I don't like really messing around with because I don't know what set of symbols to ascribe to them
Hmm.
yet. I'll say I don't know what set
Hmm.
of symbols to ascribe to them. Do I invoke a Sephiroth between that, or invoke a Sephiroth that's one at one end or the other of that particular path and do the working? Or do I attach it to its closest ray, like the red ray or the yellow ray, and do the working? Like there's a lot of unanswered questions there. And then when I finally get it in the room, what do I do with it? I'm still ascribing it to the tarot, obviously. So I'm going to be working off the symbolism of the tarot in creating that ritual drama. But what do I do with it? I don't know how to answer these questions yet. So it's beyond me, dude.
That's what it's all about, and that's what I've been trying to figure out over the last few days is, okay, how do I formulate these aspects? What sort of symbolisms can I use? Like, how do I apply these energies? And I've found that using, like, I don't know if I would call it medical astrology, but like what the way that I have begun working with it is if I have somebody that so like Taurus is attributed to the head, Leo is attributed to the heart, Scorpio is attributed to the genitals and the anus. Like that's a very practical way that I've begun applying it.
Mm-hmm.
And also looking at the elemental aspects. So if somebody has a fiery energy, like perhaps, maybe working with Aries or maybe working with what the opposite of Aries is. But when you mention the volatility of them, I can't help but think of the sub elements and the way that the air and fire is more volatile than, fire and water. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that when I was studying the Enochian system for the Golden Dawn, that was the only way that I could conceptualize the tarot. And you can
Sure.
link the court cards to the major arcana,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a few missing, and that's why I sort of abandoned the idea because I couldn't perfectly synchronize the sub elemental forces with the zodiac, because there's 16 of those sub elemental forces, and well, 20 if you're working with the Tablet of Union,
Sure.
and then there's 22 major arcana. Like there was a few outliers there, and I couldn't reconcile it at the time. Maybe I'll take another look actually now that we're having this conversation.
That would be great. One thing that I've learned is from reading Crowley's Book of Thoth and Lon Malo Duquette's Understanding the Thoth Tarot, is like the princess cards or the pages are actually attributed to the higher. They're not really elemental. Like they're attributed to like the North and South poles and the zodiac to some degree. Another thing that I've been sort of entertaining is to take the Fool and the Universe out and to just
Okay.
operate with those 20 cards. And that has been interesting. I won't say that it's been fruitful yet, but it's been interesting.
Okay. Okay. I have heard of using the universe or the world as a double association with the element of Earth, and I like that because it also alludes to the fact that there is no Earth. It's just Binah. It's just Saturn, right?
Sure, sure.
And I like that. I like that idea because it sort of brings the Kabbalistic scheme right back to the supernals after the manifestation of Yesod. That's cool because then it's not really a tree; it's sort of like a nestled
Yeah, yeah.
collection of spheres. I like that. I like that a lot. Um, yeah, I don't know what to do. I mean, so with the zodiac, the obvious thing that I would love to do is to use the dodecagram. But I like maybe just take it right off of the rose, whatever orientation it has on the rose
Fingers
cross.
crossed.
Yeah, and create a dodecagram out of that, like a unicursal dodecagram,
Yeah,
and then
yeah. I'm
ask
looking at
the
yeah.
ask the obvious question: what is the reconciler between all of those forces? And that's your quintessence. That's the center of the blooming rose, right?
Yes,
I'd
absolutely. That
probably do
tiny,
something
tiny
like that.
white dot. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. I'm looking at I have a printout of the Rosy Cross layman on my wall, and I'm looking at it as you're discussing this, and my head is just going.
Well, so the
Oh
problem
yeah.
is I would I would make like the dodecagram just completely fit right over top of that.
Yeah.
And then like because one of the things I was thinking, if these things are so bloody volatile, maybe they need each other to balance them out.
I think
And
so.
you could do that with the dodecagram.
Hmm.
But I could be wrong. I don't know. It's definitely not my strong suit. My strong suit is very much the second row there, the second
Sure.
leaf of petals. Um, gosh, hey, maybe if we meet again, I'll have more information for you.
Same. That's
uh,
honestly one of the things that this is all about is trying to be sort of scientific about this and have peer reviews and peer study to see like, hey, what's going on with this, what has your experience been? So I love that we're having this discussion.
well, no, of course, and I if I were to throw science under the bus, I'd say that they failed to carry the torch in that regard.
Hmm,
That
sure.
hermetics is the new science, and science is more like religion.
Yeah, yeah,
and
definitely.
I don't know where religions become fanaticism, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe science and religion have finally united with each other and are just this sphere of psychotic thinking. I don't know.
I mean, like we're almost touching on that third wheel now. Like at some point, like there's just such a subtle gradients
Hmm.
between things sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how has magic changed your life for the better? I know that's such a
Uh,
hard question the longer you've been practicing, but
if I were to answer your question literally, I don't know how. I have no idea how. Despite, like you said, having almost a decade doing this stuff, I still consider myself a beginner. I still don't know how any of this stuff works. No idea whatsoever. Right. I mean, the obvious thing to say here is to kind of give the Golden Dawn thread a little bit of credit. The knowledge and conversation was probably the biggest thing that changed my life. And
okay. Yeah.
one of the things that I talked about on a Reddit post recently was what the knowledge conversation really means, and this idea that you and the higher self are two separate beings is something that really needs to be challenged, and removing the levels of distinction between you and the higher self really seems to be what the inner order work is all about. And then what happens? And then you start to break down these degrees of distinction between you and the higher self, and then all of a sudden the higher self is taking on its own work. And what is that? Like, who knows? Also, so like the obvious answer to your question is the knowledge and conversation. That was the thing, that was the lightning bolt that changed everything, right? And I'm
Mhm.
living in the aftershock of that lightning bolt, and probably will be for the rest of my days, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think a lot of people would challenge you challenging the concept of the higher self, or the Socratic daemon, or the holy guardian angel, as it were, as being a separate being. But I mean, I that's been my experience, what little experience I have had with that concept.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I view, I mean, it's a tree, right? There's roots and then there's branches. And
Yeah.
we don't say that the branches are separate from the trunk or the roots. It's all one being. There's distinguishable features along the way. But like I said, it's another issue of gradients and subtlety.
No, no, I love that analogy, because now we're asking, is the leaf a part of the tree? Is the branch a part of the tree? Is the branch the tree? Where's the tree?
Right.
Where's the tree?
Where is it? Exactly.
Is it the trunk? Is it the roots? Are the roots a part of the tree? Is the
Is
trunk
it
the
the seed
tree?
that we no longer see?
Exactly, right? Like where, and for somebody, somebody encountering the higher self, and somebody going through the process of the knowledge and conversation, these are the questions you have to ask. You have
Mhm.
to ask, and there is an answer. You come to an answer. I won't obviously reveal it here, but I'll say that's the thing that I'm looking for in all of those writings. When
Yes.
I'm looking to assess somebody's degree of initiation or degree of adepthood, and a lot of the people that you would think are adepts are not. They're not talking about this stuff. They're not talking about the tree the way that we were just talking about the tree. um, I'm appalled at theosophic literature for this reason, because they suppose that the masters were real people that actually existed, rather than a
I think
metaphor
that's
for the higher
dangerous.
self.
Yeah, that's a dangerous perspective to take in a lot of ways, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like Dion Fortune, brilliant magician, brilliant initiate, operating on an initiate level. One of the most profound psychics that I've ever encountered in literature,
Mhm.
and yet even she fell into this trapping of supposing that there were masters behind it all. She was
Mhm.
encountering the higher self. That's what the masters were mistaken for.
Mhm.
And it's a real shame, because it shows how close these people came to that inner order work, to that grade of Adeptus Minor. Yet they
Absolutely.
clothe the higher self in the masters, this anthropomorphic form of the masters. And it's like, damn, they were so close. and they didn't
Yeah,
get it.
forest through the trees. It makes me wonder how much, because Blavatsky, Blavatsky was the same for
Mm.
me. It was like she was like literal, like what are they called? Tulpas, like literal masters. And I'm just like, you're I don't want to say smarter than this, but you know, like you know better, I guess is what I'll say.
We'd like to think so, right? We'd like to think that, but I mean, of course, maybe we're wrong because she didn't get it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Maybe she's not smarter than that, and it's
Mhm.
unfortunate to think, yeah, gosh, so sad. Yeah.
So you've mentioned Dion Fortune and Israel Regardie and Aleister Crowley. Is there any, just off the top of your head, is there any other influences that you feel sort of really helped propel you forward in your practice?
Hmm.
Just off the top of your head.
I mean, my inspiration and influence doesn't always come from magical circles. Um,
Excellent. I love to hear that.
fiction, fiction will do it. A really good
Excellent.
fiction story.
Mhm.
Rock stars as well. I love
Mhm.
Jethro Tull.
All right.
I
All right.
love like, gosh, they were like gods. The way they jumped around the stage, like
Well, they were
watching.
conducting forces much like a magician conducts forces in the astral or the etheric, realms. Only they're
Yeah,
doing it
yeah,
physically, right?
yeah. And even when I like, ritual is obviously a performance, and we're always performing as if there's an audience, whether there is or not. And when I'm looking at my ability to create a ritual drama, I'm looking at rock stars and their ability to hold that rock star charisma while they're on stage. And I look at Ian Anderson, dude, like with his leg up playing the flute in the middle of Thick as a Brick. And I'm like, dude, gives me chills just think about it.
Well,
But
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
that
Go ahead.
that's where my inspiration comes from.
Okay.
And charisma in ritual is so powerful. And actually,
Yes.
a book that I would recommend to people is, I would give this to a philosophist or a new portal member, The Charisma Myth by
Okay.
Olivia Fox Cabane. Terrific book. Um, it's I'll say that there's a significant amount of progress that has come out of that
Okay.
book in just the ability to hold the energy and create a ritual drama out of what's being invoked. But Rockstars had it, dude. Oh my gosh, did they ever had it? I still watch Led Zeppelin in Madison Square Garden.
I was gonna bring up Jimmy Page because he was
Oh,
super into
dude.
Crowley and stuff. Yeah.
I'm like regularly cry at the end of that performance because I know how much power, and it's that thing again where they have no idea what they're doing. They have no
Maybe.
idea that maybe Jimmy had like some kind of inkling
I think Jimmy might have.
as to the significance of what he was doing in that concert. But where it's one of those things where it created such a shock to the world that we're still living in the sort of aftershock of that one concert, right? It's amazing, amazing. So that's where a lot of my influence comes from. I'm not always impressed by magical writings if it doesn't really take part of that sort of inner order vibe, or that sort of initiate level vibe. And
Mhm.
there's not a whole lot of them. So sorry to say. I mean, if I don't even know what the percentage would be, but it would be in the high
Single digits.
90s. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I
single
see.
digit.
Yeah.
Those who don't make it, don't those
Yeah.
who don't
Right.
make
Right.
the
Right.
grade, so to speak. And
Mhm.
it's really sad to see. And yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is, but I don't get a whole lot from magical writings, um, other than like fodder to rip apart and reassemble, like kind of reverse engineer things that have been done before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm.
It's interesting. I if I had to estimate, I would say that probably between 2 and 5%. And the reason that I
Mm.
give that number is for two reasons. I don't know if you're familiar with Napoleon Hill and his work Outwitting the Devil, but in that, oh, you got it.
Yeah, right here.
So he mentions how 2%, how the devil controls 98%.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with unconsciousness.
Yeah.
And I read a recent study that said that only 5% of our population is self-aware. So I'm wondering, if that is the case, then I take microcosm and macrocosm. There's a population of occultists as well. So maybe only 2 to 5% of them are self-aware enough to receive the teachings from the White Lodge or the Inner Order, or, the daemon, so to speak.
That's a pretty fair assessment. And
Mhm.
and Napoleon Hill, I don't know what he was channeling. It was probably his own higher self, because people can have that kind of communication with
Or
their
shadow,
own
maybe.
higher self. Yeah, I mean, whatever it was, doesn't seem to matter to me. I mean, the information is quite powerful,
Mhm.
and whatever that character, that devil character, was referring to, uh, to me, it's the Adept. To me, it's the Adept 100%. You gave a perfect description, like the non-drifter gave a
Yes,
perfect
yes,
description of what the Adept really is. And
yes.
if anybody were to measure themselves up and sort of create a checklist of what are the characteristics of a true Adept or a true non-drifter, so to speak, I would bring out that book, and I would use that as a checklist to see where a person's hitting those levels of initiation and where they're not, right?
Absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
it was, the non-drifter was totally that Adept-like individual for sure.
Yeah, that book was a turning point for me, because I struggled with like executive function, well, executive dysfunction more, and like ADHD. So when I learned that focus is a magical tool, and I
Mm.
learned to implement that, focus became like a mantra or an end for me, to where it just like it turned my awareness into like a laser beam. And I found that focus is like, it really is like a laser that burns a hole through this reality into the one that you're pointing it at.
Mm. Mm.
And you yeah, that description of the non-drifter, like you said, is just so astute and accurate in my experience, that yeah, I had a feeling you might have read
Oh,
that
yeah.
work before.
Yeah. I read it in the neophyte grade, actually, and
Okay.
it scared the crap out of me at the time. But
I
later
can
I
see
came
that.
to see what it was that Napoleon, or Napoleon's daemon, was talking about, and it was quite profound. And it was, again, one of those things where it like scared me at the time, and I didn't think that there was much here, but like later on I was like, oh my gosh, that book like tore me open.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
uh,
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, and it's awesome too, because like that the title throws off a lot of people, and I think he knew that it would. It's sort of like a filter process, I think,
Yeah.
to name it, like to just bring up the fact that you're talking to the devil. It's like only someone who's willing to confront the devil may be worthy of that information. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting.
So, what are some entities you mentioned working with Osiris and Elvis? Is there any other
uh,
entities that you feel help to propel you forward in your practice?
oh yeah, I mean, I love the
Well, there's the
Enoki.
typical Golden Dawn god forms, of course. I didn't think about that, but go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the Golden Dawn god forms, and I guess like at the time when I was in the portal grade, and I was sort of writing my Adeptus Minor, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna assume all the god forms of the Neophyte Temple, and turns out I really only needed to work with Osiris in order
Interesting.
for the idea of assuming god forms to really take root.
Right.
But it's that passion and vigor of the portal member that says, "Oh, I'm going to do all this. Oh, I'm going to do all that." Right? I even had this wild idea of creating four tablets and a tablet of union over 600 squares of like three-dimensional pyramids,
Yeah.
truncated pyramids.
Yes.
And I'm like, I brought a poor friend of mine into this wild idea, and I'm like, how can we do this? How can we do this? And then like it was another one of those things. It was the exercise of sort of grounding that vision that did the inner work, so that I could basically just like get what
Uh-huh.
I needed out of that exercise without having to go through the exercise. It was the same with the god forms. I'm like, oh, I'm going to assume every god form in the Neophyte temple, and turns out I only needed to work with Osiris in order to. And I don't think I was necessarily partial to Osiris. I could have done Isis, and I
Hmm.
did a little bit of working with Isis, but it didn't have nearly as big of an impact as the god form of Osiris. So maybe it does have maybe it does make a difference. But yeah, like after the Osiris workings, I was like, yeah, okay, I get what God forms are and why we assume them,
Hmm.
and it was easy for me to kind of move on to other things. And then lately, it's well, so I love the Enochian kings,
Mm.
the kings that are invoked from the center of the Enochian tablets.
Okay.
Love that current. Really,
Okay.
really love that current of energy. I don't anthropomorphize. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Uh,
Anthropomorphize?
yes. I don't create anthropomorphic forms of the energies that I invoke generally, and I
Uh-huh.
wonder if that's just maybe the image creating faculty works differently. I don't know, but I do know that they do have those forms, and people project those forms onto them. Because I had some candles that I used the Enochian kings to consecrate, and I was having dinner with my girlfriend one day, and we had this candle set in the center of the table, and didn't say anything, just kind of put them out. And she's like, "Oh, those candles look like what did she say? Like brothers sitting at the end of a very long cross shaped table." And I got chills. I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And I said,
Wow.
"Yep, that's them."
And
But I don't
that is.
experience them. I don't experience them that way in ritual, right? There is a substance, there is a texture, and
Mhm.
and if you were to like blindfold me and put me in a temple space where those energies were present, I'd be able to tell what they are for sure. But they don't have a form that I
Mhm.
can deduce, right? Maybe
Mhm.
if maybe I do some more moon working and I repair my image creating faculty, and they'll somehow magically have a form, but I don't experience them that way. No.
Well, some people lack aphantasia, I think is the condition. Some people actually lack a faculty to visualize as deeply as others. So it could or could not be that. But yeah, I I definitely I like that take because so much about, and this relates to doing earlier work, so much of the modern day magician is about being able to express your experience.
Hmm.
And a lot of times that comes down to names and images and things like that. But so many of these currents, especially the Enochian current, is so abstract and far out and subtle that sometimes I find that it narrows the connection if you try to bring it
Oh yeah.
down too far.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know anybody who does know what the Enochian, what those entities are.
Mhm.
Um, I can usually tell if somebody's like doing effective Enochian magic. Um, again, just based on how they're talking about them, they very much seem to be outside the observable universe, and that's really cool.
I
That's
think
really
so.
really cool that is the true alien or the true extraterrestrials, not necessarily somebody from another planet, but
Mhm.
somebody from outside the observable universe. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And this Enochian language, I had a lot of criticism for somebody recently who was talking about Enochian on Instagram, and it's the obsession with the pronunciation of the calls that is really suspect to me. And it's like, oh dude, you don't get it at all. This is just a means of communication. Doesn't matter how you pronounce them, you have to be
Yeah.
consistent in how you pronounce them, but it
Yeah.
doesn't
Right.
matter. This is a communication that you're setting up with those entities so that you can communicate with each other. So when you read a line off the tablet, say one of the six seniors, you have to pronounce it the same every single time.
Yes.
They're going to know, they can see your intent whether you vibrate those names or not.
Mhm.
And when you go the extra step of vibrating the god name consistently, you're saying to them, manifest this ray, manifest this ray of, if it were the senior of Mars, it would be the red ray. It's this means of communication that you're setting up with the watchers. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter how you pronounce it. I mean, you can create that's your own artistic interpretation of those names
Mhm.
upon that tablet. because there's no way of us knowing exactly how those names were pronounced when Dee and Kelly scribed them in the first place. And as an extension, they don't know how it was originally pronounced in Enoch's time,
Exactly.
if that allegedly is the same kind of language. So don't get hung up on pronunciation. Develop something that has your own artistic interpretation of those names, especially if you use the Enochian lettering. That stuff can bring about its own insights, its own alien type insights, and then you develop something that resonates with you as an artist, and you make that consistent. And then all of a sudden, you're developing a relationship with the watchers. You're not just blindly accepting what's been handed down to you, right?
Yeah, one thing I want to mention about that is how much stronger my connection with that current got when I came up with my own pronunciations.
Mm-hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
I said, okay, like Aaron Leitch has like his thing, and
Mm-hmm.
like Duquette like has his thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just like, I just sat down one day and just like scooted everything out of the way, out of my
Mm-hmm.
mind, and I just opened myself up and just looked at the words and listened to what was being said to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like I'm getting chills, like that lightning bolt just came down, and I was like, whoa, like it was just, the connection was just so much stronger whenever I gave my own pronunciations
Yeah.
to the words.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can even deduce this from the material that Rigardi reproduced in the Golden Dawn text, like the big brick Golden Dawn text.
Yeah,
This one
yeah,
right here. And he even says in that chapter that there's more than one way of pronouncing these things. Like you can pronounce it like almost the boring phonetic way, like XRP for the line
yeah,
of air on the Enochian tablet, or you can do Aox Ray Pay or something like that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
right
exactly.
right there, that you can deduce that there's no set way of pronouncing these things as long as it's consistent.
Mhm.
Consistency seems to be the key, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the key. Exactly. Is doing it the same every time, because if this is, I say this so often, but it's so true to me. This is a scientific process as well as an artistic one. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're using different formulas to achieve the same results, you're not going to be consistent, and you're going to stunt your growth, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent. I love discussing Enochian, because it's not something that is people get into it and they're like, oh, this is weird, and then they put it aside and they say later, I'm like, oh, you got no idea. Like,
Oh, dude, it's
it's
weird.
weird.
It's real weird.
And
Um,
it gets weirder.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Boy, does it ever. And I still don't know anything about it, right? I'll say I have the pretty good grasp on the system as it was handed down from the Golden Dawn, like the four elemental tablets and the sub angles and all of that kind of stuff. There's really nothing there that if I had to write a ritual I couldn't do or call upon. But I still don't know what this stuff is. I don't know what we're calling on, right? No
I
idea
have
whatsoever.
no idea. I have my visions and I have
Yeah.
my communications, but at the end of the day, I'm like, how subjective is this? How objective is this? And that's one reason I think it's important to have these conversations, because if I have spirals, or sorry, if I have visions of spirals that remind me of like a double helix in the DNA,
Mm.
like that could mean that, like, hey, like they're a part of our DNA, or it could mean like that they helped construct our DNA. I
Yeah.
have no idea. But if we find similarities, there's a sort of meta truth that can potentially be extracted from it. I don't know. All I know is it's weird. It's
Yep.
weird stuff.
Yep. I have some friends who are much more mediumistic than I am. And when we have conversations about Enochian, we always get this impression that our universe is like a snow globe on the desk of an Enochian entity.
Oh yeah.
And we call them watchers because they're just kind of holding this universe, or I guess not the universe, because there is no the universe, but our sphere of sensation, like our individual spheres of sensation, are little snow globes in like a gallery. And these watcher beings, these Enochian entities, are just walking up and down this gallery with these billions of little globes, which are our individual spheres of sensations. That's what my medium friends pull out of our Enochian conversations. But
that resonates with me. For me, it's not a snow globe; it's a test tube or a petri dish. I
yeah,
guess
yeah, even better.
I don't know if I've ever discussed this with anyone. I've definitely never discussed it on the channel, but the first time I experienced Enochian energy, I had never even heard of the Enochian system. The
Ah,
first time I experienced Enochian energy, I was doing this really weird meditation that I was prompted to do out of nowhere. I sat there and I asked, "Who are you?" And I got an answer.
hmm,
And that answer made me realize that when I ask, "Who are you?" I'm not talking to myself.
hmm,
And then I said, "Okay, well, then who am I?" And then I got an answer in an image. Well, then I went through the who, what, when, where, how, why of
sure.
you and I. And I had a very Enochian experience. Later, it was only until later that I recognized it to be very Enochian or supraterrestrial.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
because you're sort of breaking up the spirit sensation when you're doing that. You're sort
yeah.
of like creating a little a null space, or like a zero
Yes.
space inside the spirit
Yes.
sensation. That's really cool.
Yeah, but a lot of the images I was getting were of, and I don't take this literally. I take it as it was passing through the filter of my understanding and experience. So when I say test tubes and petri dishes, I
Hmm,
don't necessarily mean that literally, but I think that's how they think about us when they think through our filters and lenses.
sure.
And yeah, so I love that there seems to be a similarity there
Yeah.
with the snow globes. That seems very resonant with what I've experienced,
Yeah,
which
and
makes
that's
it
a
even weirder.
and it's a good thing because it means that we're both hitting on something, which is cool.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
cool, right? Two
hmm
different perspectives of some kind of objective truth, which is beyond both of us.
exactly. Yeah. So, what are some recommended practices that you could sub prescribe to other practitioners out there?
I don't know, dude. Depends on what you're into. Really depends on what you're into. I would have different answers for different people based on where they're at.
What
There's
about a beginner?
um like what are we talking about? Like what
Like
thread of
somebody who came across this channel and they're like, "What? These people believe in magic? Like they must be stupid and out of their mind."
oh. Well, I'm okay with that. I don't
Sure,
mind at all,
sure.
right?
But I want to help them try to open their mind and see how beneficial it could be to have a more open perspective. So maybe just have an open mind. Maybe I just answered my own question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like you did. Because I'm not partial. It's I'm very different in that regard, and I think a lot of Golden Dawn folk, like Rosicrucian style folk, are similar in that we tend to keep people away from this stuff rather
Hmm,
than invite them in.
hmm,
Because it's dangerous, man. It's real dangerous, and dangerous to somebody who doesn't have people like us around to help and to guide them. Let's say some guy is sitting alone in his dark bedroom at 17 or 18 years old, and he's listening to the stuff that we're saying on this little conversation. Then he takes on the work himself
sure,
without a guide, without any kind of guidance, right? And we can't
sure.
be there with him one on one. And all of a sudden, the water stops being shallow and it goes beyond his depth. And then sometimes, like, people, we call it, in my little circle of friends here in Ontario, we call it going wild.
Sure.
Like, you're out of your depth and you're in the pure wilderness, dude. And there's
Yeah.
there's no masters, there's no guides, there's no one to help you, because you've cut yourself off from the hub, and you're just kind of floating off in magical wilderness.
Right.
So I mean, now there's that conversation, right?
Hmm.
And then the other conversation is somebody showing a willingness, the sort of hypothetical student or candidate that we talked about at the beginning of this little interview. What am I going to say to that person? So obviously I'm a Golden Dawn guy, if you want to call it that. So like what kind of exercises do I give to a neophyte? The posture of pure awareness is pretty powerful, and the posture of pure awareness is basically you're sitting however is comfortable for you to sit. Your spine is as straight as you can possibly make it. And then all you're doing is not moving for 20 minutes. For 20 minutes, not moving. Set a timer on your watch or your phone, and maybe pick a point on the wall and keep your eyes open or closed, up to you, but you're just not moving. The only thing that you're allowed to do is breathe. To somebody who's a little further along in the path and wants to start dissolving the subject-object relationship, cold water, ice baths is something that I would recommend.
Love it. Love
because
it.
they flare up. Ice baths flare up the subject-object relationship like nothing else. If you don't think you have an ego, don't go jump in a frozen lake, and you will meet your ego.
Oh yeah.
But that's a wonderful exercise, because you go and you experience that very strong sensation, and all of a sudden you get to poke and prod it. It swells up really big so that you can see it, and then all of a sudden we're dissolving the boundary between you and this strong sensation. And all of a sudden, and then sooner or later, there is no you. It's just sensation. It's just pure sensation. And then you find that you could stay in this freezing cold ice bath almost indefinitely, and it's completely comfortable, right? Those are the kind of things. It's all very tantric. It's all. I think like a lot of the Golden Dawn stuff nowadays is missing that tantric element that they seem to have had when they first started, right?
Boy, yeah.
And then in regards to actual ritual work, you need some sort of guide. I would recommend some sort of guide, even if it's a book. I know there's like self-initiation books that are really good for the Golden Dawn thread. The Cicero book, what's it called?
Self-initiation into the Golden Dawn tradition.
Yeah, that's the one. That's a little slower paced. It's got an outer order and an inner order, and you're not really doing any real invocations until the second order work, when they kind of send you off on your own. And then there's Liam Christopher's stuff, which is inner order work right off the bat, right? And the differences between those two paths, I would say, is the Cicero stuff is a long burn and it might not work. And the Liam Christopher stuff is very fast paced, and it is highly effective if you can make it through the entirety of the book. And when I mention those books, it really does seem things are going in the direction of self-initiation. That like the temples aren't really accomplishing much, and that's sad to say. Maybe they needed to exist to get this stuff going, to sort of initiate us as a society. But now, I mean, I meet people who are perfectly capable of initiating themselves. It's a little trickier because if you don't have a guide or some kind of system to work with, it can be quite dangerous, and you can get yourself into sort of that astral wilderness and potentially do yourself some serious psychological harm, right?
Yeah.
But I would the tantric exercises and the self-initiation books are probably where I would lead people if I were to point them in any direction.
Okay.
That would probably be it. Yeah.
So this is one thing that I try to teach the people who ask me, that tantric, what I consider to be the etheric field or body. To me, that etheric body is the link between the astral plane and the physical world. So if you can engage with that, it accelerates and propels that growth process to an exponential degree. And cold showers are excellent. Or ice baths. Unless I'm like sick or something, I try to take a cold shower every single morning. It's the first thing of part of my ceremony. My daily ceremony begins with cold shower. And one of the best things about that is it taught me to seek adversity, because so often growth is right at the edge of our comfort zone. You touched on that when you mentioned astrology. And how you enjoy the things that are trialing and trying to you, and cold showers and tantra. These are things that take work, and I think are great recommendations. And one thing that I wanted to mention was part of the reason that I don't know what word to use, direct this channel the way that I do is because the fact that it's like an open ocean. We have rivers coming in from every direction because it's on YouTube.
Yeah,
If this were just a forum, and the nature of the channel, Clifoth or Clipote Quest, I mean, like, it's going to draw a certain type of person. And because of that, I try to do things a certain way that I wouldn't do if I were just having a conversation with an individual. Like, I
sure.
wouldn't say, "Hi, my name's Corbin. Have you ever experienced the Clifoth before?" Like, it's because there's people coming in from all directions. Like, people will end up here accidentally, no doubt.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I'm always trying to sort of manage, I guess, the types of conversations that are being had as often as I can. But it's so hard to do because I can't put a filter on who ends up on this channel at the end of the day.
Oh, sure. And I mean, as much as we wrote out some questions, we're very much dancing between the lines. Uh,
We are, we are, and there's a reason that, these questions have formulated, because these are the types of things that tend to come up in these conversations.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so as far as making sure that you're not just like initiating someone who isn't ready and pulling them down into your depths, because there is like a spiritual bends that can happen when you pull somebody down too fast.
yeah, yeah,
Like in scuba diving, there's you can't ascend or descend too quickly, or it has serious effects on
yeah, yeah.
your psychic and etheric biology.
Sure. Yeah.
Mhm. Awesome. So what are some difficulties that you've experienced along the way that you can that you can discuss with us?
Oh gosh. Oh, I mean, it's like typical. I mean, the same difficulties I had with school, really. The task of reading all of this stuff and main ideas, especially, is something that I struggle with. Supporting details, I can nail everything, right? But main ideas, I usually miss. I was doing something. I wrote something for the god of Pan, and I was going to do this whole consecration ritual for this talisman that I was going to use to invoke the god of Pan, and and I had everything set up. I had all my correspondences perfect, all my supporting details, and then, like, right in the middle of the ceremony, I realize, oh, this is the antler of a stag, not a goat. And I'm like, I completely missed. And then I'm like, okay, shut this down. We're not doing this. And then I had to kind of de-escalate the whole ritual drama in a creative way. But that's a perfect example. It's like I hit all the supporting details. All my correspondences are perfect. My astrological day and timing is perfect. I know exactly what Enochian forces I'm going to call into, exactly what ray of the Kabbalistic system I'm going to work with. Oh, but it's a deer antler, not a goat antler. Missed like the main point of the whole thing, and that is constant, has been constant. I just miss the
Okay.
main stuff, and I've had I don't know. It's probably like an autism or ADHD thing. But I really do challenge that, because I feel like autistic people could really make a shift to the savant side of things very easily, just by restoring health to the body. And I'll say that was part of the journey through the elemental grades, was realizing that the sort of Buddhahood only really manifests in a healthy body. And I can use that. So if I want to be a little less Buddha-ish, I can ingest certain things, or interact with certain substances that sort of snap me out of the current, if you will.
Right. Oh
But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
the kind of the descent of the Buddhahood very much relies upon a strong physical body, and a vital
Mhm.
physical body. And
Yes.
learning that early on was tough, because it had a manifestation in things like autism and ADHD. But
Hmm.
I noticed those things disappear, ADHD especially, in restoring that health to the physical body. And then all of a sudden, autism started to function more like savantism, and that's really cool. That's
Oh yeah.
very, very, very cool, right?
Hmm.
And for people who may fall on that autism spectrum listening to this, just know that like it is possible to switch to the savant side of things, but it's a heck of a lot of work and a lot of maintenance, right?
It is. Yeah, it can be definitely. And whenever I think about what you're talking about, there's two ways that I think about it. One is like force and form, and like only a certain form can channel a certain force. Like it has to be like you can't fit a triangle peg through a square hole. One. But another thing is like that hermetic axiom of as above, so below. If the below is not suitable for the above, there's no harmony. There's no sympathy,
Yeah,
toward
yeah,
them.
of course.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would say that creating I kind of go off of that, creating a healthy and vital body that's capable on a nervous level, like just speaking the nervous system, the actual currents that are moving through the body in regards to ritual work and ritual
Yeah,
drama, you've got to be
yeah.
exceptionally healthy because there's some powerful stuff out there, dude, that can really screw you up if you don't have if your nervous system is not healthy.
Mhm.
And that's another positive benefit of ice bath is as well, is
Yeah,
it kind of revs your engine up a couple of gears so that you can function with those higher levels of energy pulsing through your body, right?
yes,
And if the
yeah.
ice is doing anything, it's creating your body into a very efficient mitochondrial engine, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it has the act of just triggering the immune system, like you said, through like mitochondria,
Mm-hmm.
and just the whole biophysiological process that takes place when you willingly subject yourself to discomfort. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very or it can be a very transformative process for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what are some things to avoid?
Drugs, drugs and
Okay.
alcohol will
Mhm.
completely sabotage your progress, right?
Mhm.
Moderation, you'll probably get away with it. You don't need them. You don't
Right.
need them at all, right? You can induce psychic visions with practice. I mean, it takes longer. The only instance where I would see something like psychedelic drugs or alcohol being a kind of aid is somebody who has sworn off the magical path completely, but still needs to have some kind of
Ah,
interaction with the psychic sphere,
to
right?
dissolve. Yeah.
I heard dissolve. You use the keyword. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is I heard Joe Rogan talk about his relationship to psychedelics, and
Hmm.
and he's got it, man. Like
Hmm.
he knows what the psychedelics are doing, and he knows how to use them to do that. And it's
Right.
that dissolution. It's the dissolution of the subject object relationship
Yes.
that
Hmm.
psychedelics in higher doses are so perfectly capable of doing. But you don't need them. You don't need them. You don't need them. Joe would have to do the work if he wanted to get that without the psychedelics. And for those who really don't want to do the work, I mean, psychedelics can be a very powerful thing in their lives. And funny enough, those are probably the people that could moderate the best as well. Because if I were to give Joe some credit, he does know how to moderate from the way he talks about these things.
Hmm.
It's those who assume that the magic comes from the psychedelics, and that is sort of a means to an end. That's
Aha.
where it gets tricky. And even Terence McKenna fell victim to this, right?
I think
Terence
so.
died an addict. Terence
Hmm.
died a drug addict, right? He could
Hmm.
not do what he did without the psychedelics. And he
Yeah.
was like really close to adepthood, if you will.
Yeah.
And it just kept describing it, did the same thing that the Theosophists did. Only in the place of the master is the magic mushroom.
Sure. Yeah.
Kept describing the genius as something
Yeah.
coming from the magic mushroom. And I'm like, no, 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 it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. This is just a tool to show you that it's your genius, it's your diamond that is speaking to you and having communion with you, right?
Yeah.
And we can use the tool as a means of awakening this awareness that the diamond really is there. But if we keep using the tool as a means to contact the diamond, then we've missed the point, and we're addicts, right? We're people who are heavily dependent on physical substance for illumination.
Yeah.
Um,
I even have wondered how much I rely on ceremony and ritual to achieve the results. Sometimes when I was, I won't say that I like crossed the abyss or anything, but when I was working with the energies of Da'ath, I had a severe crisis where I was like, I'm gonna have to give up magic
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's become so integrated into my identity
yeah.
that I'm not going to be able to pass this ordeal until I give up magic. And then something was like, what do you, how are you going to give up magic? Like
Yeah,
everything is magic.
yeah.
You can give up your perspective of what you think magic is, and you should to some degree, but you're you're not going to get out of doing magic if you're alive. It's just it's a part of life. I think magic is part of the process of life to some degree, perhaps. I digress. But yeah, I think what you're touching on is very important. Not attributing the enlightenment to the mushroom or to the master. It's just that they are sort of like dissolving or clearing out the blockages that might be there.
Well, so there's two ways to go about this. Um, I'm also, having said everything I just said, I'm also of the belief that we are very dependent on certain things. Like, you could be spiritual out of your eyeballs, but you still need to eat, you still need to drink water, you still need to breathe air, and you still need to poop.
Yep.
Right? That's
Yeah.
just the way it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as long as things continue to progress in sort of this realm of Malkuth or Asya, as long as we're interacting with the physical world as beings, there is going to be some kind of dependency on material substance, right?
Yeah.
Now, is that material substance being used as a means to an end or an end in itself? And I think where we make the mistake is seeing things like psychedelic drugs and alcohol and other drugs, right? It's all the same category of things, seeing them as an end in themselves rather than a means to an end, right?
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
but the dependency is always going to be there, always, always, always. Well, one of the things that's nice about awareness and discernment is you sort of get to choose what your dependency is. And when it rules your thinking and your behavior without your consent, there we
Mhm.
have full-blown addiction, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's I agree. It's and that starts working back into unconscious action and being unaware and unenlightened, so to speak. So how is magic typically viewed in your area?
Behind closed doors. This is Pickles,
Is
by
it
the way.
hi pickles? That is a
um,
relatively large animal.
I'm
Well,
just
a
small.
relatively large cat, of course. It's it's yeah, that's a large cat. It seems like
No, I'm small. I'm like 5'4", dude.
I'm
um,
not much taller.
Magic. So I'm Southern Ontario, about an hour away from Toronto. Sort of like, it's mid-sized city, university city, Guelph, Ontario, and there's art here. There's a lot of art, and that's about as magical as it gets. There I think there's one modern mystery school temple in town, and it doesn't have a lot going on there. Um, and that's it. Like, that's really all we've got. Like I said, we've got a Golden Dawn temple in Toronto, but even them, I talked to somebody who was a member for about a decade and really wasn't all that impressed with what came
Mhm.
out of his work there. So there's not much going on, and I don't know if there's a geographical location where a lot of this stuff is happening. Um, I've met some really terrific initiates and adepts come out of Florida. There's a temple in Atlanta who I have some good friends who are members of. So it's hard to describe a geographical location as having, maybe Arizona. There's a lot of interesting things going on there, like Sedona. Um, but yeah, Southern Ontario is boring, dude. There's nothing going on here. The most exciting thing we have is that we're an hour away from Toronto, and you go to Toronto and it's got the buzz of the big city, and it's very much a
Sure.
happening place, but very much happening here.
So I have to ask, and this person would probably detest that I'm even bringing this up, but I think it's important because it touches on something that we discussed earlier. You mentioned you're from Canada, and we discussed adepts who are either unaware that they're a magician or will repel the idea of it. Where do you think Jordan Peterson stands.
Ah,
Like, as far as magic goes, I very much feel like, especially with his Jungian concepts, he's doing very magical things. I just think he's smart enough not to call it that with as broad of an audience as he has.
I don't take in a whole lot of Jordan Peterson. For some reason,
Okay.
he is somebody that I consistently have to shut off whenever I sort of hear him speak, and I don't know why that is. Maybe I should do a bit of a deep dive on him, because I don't know. I don't exactly know. So generally, I'm leaning towards no. It's yeah, I don't know. There's
Okay.
kind of two angles to this, right? Because you can be non-dual
Sure.
and not be sort of operating on an adept level. At the same time, you can be like a very no. So I don't think the opposite is true. I don't think you can have the sort of adept level of thinking and be dualistic about things.
Mhm.
So the first thing that I look for is the non-dualism, the ability to, because that's the middle pillar that's extending all the way to the top of the
Synthesis.
tree,
Mhm.
right? And you kind of need to have that if you want to operate on that singular ego, one ego, true self, adept type level. And so there's the horizontal polarity of the tree, but there's also the vertical polarity,
Sure.
and the
Yeah.
middle pillar sort of encompasses all of that. So the
Mhm.
first thing that I'm looking for is the non-dualistic thinking, somebody who can fly from one pole to another at
Mhm.
will, essentially. Maybe he has that. Again, I haven't consumed a whole lot of his content, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. Let me see if I can give you an example of somebody who really like blows my mind. Um, Rupert Spira is somebody who comes to the mind. That guy
That
blows my
sounds
mind.
familiar.
I don't even know if I have his name right. He's like a non-dualism guy on Instagram, and he
Okay.
blows my mind consistently. Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
have to look into him. The name sounds familiar.
Mm.
Hmm.
Oh, but yeah, if I know that um you thought Jordan Peterson might detest you asking such a thing, and maybe the greatest insult to Jordan Peterson is the fact that he's uninteresting to me.
Hmm. And or maybe perhaps that I assumed that he would detest that what little material I have listened to and heard of his. Somebody asked him one time about the relationship between chakras and psychology, and he
Mm.
was just like, "Ah, not going there. Next question." And I was just like, that may have been um
Oh well, that's the dualism right there. That's the dismissal. Yeah. So I'd
but I
say,
wonder how much of that is due to how much in the spotlight he is,
mm,
and how dualistic people are at a common level, because people hear one thing and they automatically assume, people are so like ideological about
idealistic.
things.
Yeah.
Idealistic, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So
so you should be able to, if you have a true understanding of that kind of thing, then you should
I
be able
agree.
to explain it in terms that laymen can understand without getting hyper spiritual. Because
Yeah.
that's also some, when I talked about there being a vertical polarity of the tree as
Yes.
well, that's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. You need to
Yeah.
explain it in terms of the world of Asya, like the world of
Mhm.
Malkuth, right? That's a full grounding of the entire tree. And somebody who's caught in the higher spheres, maybe like
Mhm.
between Yesod and Tifereth, uh,
Mhm.
that's somebody who doesn't have their ideas grounding. They sound like fanatical and crazy, and we're talking about like subtle bodies and chakras and aliens and magic
Yeah.
and but it's I'm looking for somebody who can ground the currents of the entire tree, right? And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
if the so first of all, the dismissal is characteristic of like the dualistic way of,
Mhm.
of seeing things. That
Mhm.
that that is something that is dismissed without recognition is immediately suspect. And then
Agreed.
beyond that, if it's something that you can't talk about in layman's terms, you're stuck somewhere in the mid tree, and you don't have a good enough grounding of these concepts, right? So
Yeah.
even just going off of what you said.
Yeah, I think I agree. And one thing that's been said before by somebody else other than myself is that if you have a true understanding of something, you can explain it to a 6-year-old and they will
Mhm,
understand it. And
mhm,
there's a series on YouTube that pops up in my recommended every now and then, but it's like master violinist explains the violin at 4 different levels, or an
Yeah.
astrophysicist explains astrophysics at 4 different levels.
Yeah.
And it's like that's someone who has an understanding. They can talk about it at a PhD level or at a kindergarten level. And
Well,
that's wonderful. Yeah,
the interesting thing about this is if you look on the tree, the name of Binah is understanding.
sure.
And we talked about how Binah and Malkuth are sort of the same sphere or the same energy. So how interesting is that? That understanding is the real ability to ground the
Absolutely.
forces of the Kabbalah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's such, oh man, I could just go on and on and on
Yeah.
about the wonderful structure of the Kabbalah, and how fortunate I am to have something like that structure, to be able to just file things and all day long and make comparisons. And I mean, it allows me to I guess dissolve and synthesize
Sure.
so many different concepts.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I guess getting back into the tree, I guess as a segue into one of the questions, which is your views and any experience on the Clipote/Clifoth and the so-called tunnels or caverns that lie therein.
I don't see the point for
Okay.
myself.
Okay.
But I'm speaking as somebody who has experienced like full-blown drug addiction.
Sure.
I have, you know, a handful of years clean now, but working through that sort of gave me an understanding of clipothic energies
Sure.
and what adverse Sephiroth really look like.
Hmm.
And part of my sort of program, if you want to call it that, in staying clean and achieving a continuous state of recovery is reaching out to other addicts who are not doing so hot and are
Right.
still sort of caught up in that sphere of active addiction, if you will. And so
Hmm.
I see it and I interact with it every time I meet with an addict who's a little closer to you know, those adverse Sephiroth than I am. But at the same time, I still don't really see the point,
Hmm.
because it's kind of the way I see it is like sort of playing off, playing both sides against the middle,
Hmm.
and the middle way is supposed to. So whether you grasp the darkness and to separate the light, or whether you grasp the light to separate the darkness, doesn't really seem to matter, as long as that alchemical process of distinguishing between the two pillars, the two contending forces, is taking place. Then you have the middle way, right? You
Sure.
have the middle way that leads to the knowledge and conversation and enlightenment, essentially, right?
Okay.
So myself, like I came from like full blown, as bad as your mind can conceptualize active addiction is where I came from. And
Hmm.
so I don't really need to reinvoke that kind of stuff. I lived it.
Interesting.
And now it's more living in the more exalted spheres, the divine spheres, and calling on the divine names and so on and so forth, right?
So it's funny you mentioned that, because sometimes when people ask me where to start with this stuff, I do a little bit of like I do counseling part-time, and I recognize right away when someone I tend to recognize right away when someone is having that clifothic experience. And it's so I sometimes recommend that they go through those energies to understand them, and when they do, it's like they pop out in the Sephiroth
Yeah,
every
yeah,
single
yeah.
time. So I think that might be where some of the utility is. Do I recommend that somebody just dives down in there? No, especially without having experienced the Etz Chodesh, or the holy tree first. Like,
Yeah.
definitely try to grasp that first. But the way that I look at it is I always cite these. Sorry to my viewers who have already seen dozens of these, but I always cite two different sources. One is Jung, who said that a tree's branches can't grow to heaven unless its roots grow to hell.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
Dante said that the path to paradise begins in the inferno.
Sure.
So for me, that's what ignited my interest. I don't know, about a decade ago in shadow work. And I wanted to try to use the Clifoth as a map of the shadow. And what I found was that it's so much more than that. Like I think part of the shadow belongs in the Qlipoth or the Qliphote, but I think that it's so much more than that. And so I'm trying to understand what exactly it is. Because
Sure.
the the Etz Chaim, or I guess the Etz Kodesh, makes sense to me. It's like, okay, yeah, like I see what that kind of what that is and where that goes. But when I look down, it's just like a bottomless pit. And
Mm,
I'm like,
mm.
I'm still waiting to hear the rock hit the bottom sometimes. And it's like I get sounds of echoes of the ricochet off the sides, but
Okay.
I have yet to hit the bottom yet.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah,
If you
yeah.
know
That's
what I mean.
interesting. Um, so what can I do here? So I'm always looking at these things in a sort of an alchemical way,
Excellent.
as a
Yeah.
means of separating like the two pillars,
Mhm.
and sort of distinguishing between light and darkness.
Mhm.
So I'll say that I'm sort of thankful for the path that I had, and sort of kind of going through that darkness, because it made the light that much more extinguishable,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it was almost Tom Waits has got a really beautiful
Love
song called
Tom Waits.
San Diego Serenade, and he
Okay,
talks
I
about
never heard of it.
never saw the morning until I stayed up all night. Never
Woo-hoo.
saw the sunshine till you turned out the light. Never saw my
Oh
hometown until I stayed away too long. Never heard a melody till I needed a song. Oh
man.
gosh, right? And he's talking about that sort of alchemical interplay between the two polarities, the two contending forces of light and darkness. And that it was very much that. I didn't feel like I needed to do any kind of Qliphothic workings, because I
You
had
already
already
have.
been able to distinguish the light between the darkness just going through
Sure.
active addiction, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
somebody who is like, I have a friend who's from a perfect world, where
Mhm.
his he grew up with in like a wealthy family with nice respectable parents who loved him, and sort of brought him along in a very positive way, and he's like such a balanced individual, which is so cool to see. That
It
was
is. Yeah.
very much not my path as a young man. But I don't know how he gets to experience those darker energies without doing some kind of Qliphothic working, or going to that sort of dark realm, in order to make the light that much more distinguishable. Because somebody who's sort of raised in the light, if you will, won't be able to distinguish it as much from the darkness unless they invoke that darkness, and it makes the
So
light that much more extinguishable, right?
I think that that is very often the case, but every once in a while, and I'm not sure if I feel this way because I experience myself to be this way somewhat, but a lot of times, and I'm by no means saying that I'm balanced by any degree, but I recognize in people who are balanced something that's within myself, which is a degree of empathy. And I think
Mm.
maybe that might be how somebody raised in the light experiences the Qliphoth. If they're
Mm.
extremely
Mm.
empathetic, they can just experience it's like an initiation, having a conversation with
Oh,
someone
that's
who's
cool.
going through it.
Yeah, because this is actually bringing something up. This happened with a dear friend of mine.
Hmm.
We were sitting on a Zoom chat one day, and we were just talking about things that we're talking about as a conversation just like this. And then the topic of active addiction came up, and then this is a dear friend of mine, so I was sharing some of the more intimate details of some of the stuff that went on, and he started crying, because it was as I was taking him through what it was like for me. It was like he was living through it, right? He was living through it vicariously just in our conversation. So that's very interesting, and interesting because he was very much not that kind of person, hadn't
Right.
gone through anything like that, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
That's the empathy is a truly wonderful thing. It makes me wonder where empathy comes from, like the actual principle of empathy. It can be such a powerful thing.
Sorry,
So
cat's about to jump all over everything.
he's next. I'm gonna question him next or her next. So
uh,
yeah, so last question. Any plans for the immediate future as far as like practice or study goes?
oh gosh. I don't know. It's better to ask what books I'm reading.
What books are you reading?
That'll give me more to go off of. So I want to do Homer's Iliad. Oh, how do
Okay.
I focus this? There we go. I want to
Uh-huh.
do Homer's Iliad and get a bit of a grasp on the Greek gods and maybe do some workings with them. I mentioned Pan.
Hmm.
It's my deepest aspiration to organize the assumption of the god form of Pan in time for Halloween, so I can go around and terrorize people.
I would say that answers the question relatively well. I would I would love to um review any like sort of notes or anything whenever you feel that you have that at a level that's worth sharing. I'd love to experience that working.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I mean, I can tell you what I have so far. I mean, I'm gonna use the path between Tefareth and Hod, which is
the devil.
yeah, the devil.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that current as sort of an anchor to that energy, and then build up the God form sort of out of that ray, out
Hmm.
of that current.
Hmm.
But I also have to I need a better I need something better than that. I need something a little more uh a little deeper than that, because the trouble with assuming god forms is you have to build them up in the imagination to start with, and
Sure.
it's cool when they're already built up, and that's how it was for Osiris, which is why Osiris was the easiest thing for me to work with from the
Hmm.
Golden Dawn system. But I don't know a whole lot about Pan, and I don't know a whole lot about the Greek pantheon
Sure.
anyway. So I have to read a book like the Iliad, and I want to read The Goatfoot God by Dion Fortune. That's on my shelf as well. And there are some others, Pan's Labyrinth. I don't know the author, but just really deeply immerse myself in Pan lore, so
Sure.
that when it does come time to organize that ritual, maybe I won't even use the ray of Ayin, or the path in between Tiferet
Hmm.
and Hod.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll use something else. Maybe my deep dive in the Pan lore will bring about another path that is more suited to that god, right? That's
Could be.
generally how I would do it, is describe it to a path and work with it that way.
Excellent. Yeah, I love path working. Path working has been the most practical and transformative facet of the occult for me by far, because path working taught me scrying, and then scrying taught me astral projection.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and will remind, I should say, reminded me about astral projection, because that's something that I used to do when I was a kid, um, very, very heavily. So I love incorporating path workings into meditations. I think that's wonderful. I'm not sure what other there a couple paths come to mind when I think about Pan, but the paths are so subjective to me. I would hate to tinge your experience any certain color.
No problem. I'm in the routine of questioning arbitrary associations, because I
Excellent.
really want to challenge the system, and
Mhm.
I don't necessarily like what's been handed down in regards to our understanding of
Yeah.
Kabbalah and even the
Right.
attribution of the tarot to the paths.
Hmm.
I want to challenge as much as I can, because if there is a better way of doing things, why aren't we doing it that way?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
those are kind of bent on doing things the way that they were traditionally done. That's the thing that we talked about earlier, of like, if a system doesn't have the ability to evolve and adapt itself, it's going to die out.
It's gonna die. Exactly.
And I want to find the most
Or
efficient way
become
of doing
tyrannical.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, tyrannical, that's right. Yeah. I'm thinking of a few people in my head. I won't share. uh,
Awesome. Well, yeah. What was there anything else that you wanted to address or cover?
I don't think so. I mean, we kind of did a pretty decent interview, pretty decent conversation.
Excellent. Excellent.
I don't know. Was there anything? Were there questions that came up as we were talking that you wanted to ask?
So there was just a few I guess like side notes that I just sort of agreed with you with, but I'm not sure that it would be worth going back into. perhaps maybe in the future, if you'd like to come back on and sort of have another conversation. I love the idea of coming back like a few months or like a year later and seeing how your path has evolved and what has stayed the same.
Oh, sure.
Maybe that's something we could do if you're interested.
Yeah, yeah, let's do that. We'll keep in touch. After the interview, I'll send you my Twitter at least, and then we can go from there.
Excellent. I'd like that.
Hey man, it was great to meet you.
You too, as well. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspectives and your opinions. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I wish you well.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, of course. Take care.
See you later.